Some sad news to bring you this evening, as it's being reported that legendary professional wrestler, a star of the NWA, WWE, WCW, Sid Justice, also known as Sid Vicious, Sycho Sid, his real name is Sid Eudy, has sadly passed away at the age of 63 years old. Former WWE superstar Sid Vicious, as I mentioned, Sid Justice, Sycho Sid, went by several names during his professional wrestling career, has died at the age of 63 years old. Vicious, real name Sid Eudy, was a multi-time world champion in both WCW and WWE. His son, Gunnar Eudy, announced his death on social media today, that being Monday the 26th of August 2024, saying, quote, "In memory of my father, Sid Eudy, dear friends and family, I am deeply saddened to share that my father, Sid Eudy, has passed away after battling cancer for several years," Gunnar wrote on Facebook. "He was a man of strength, kindness and love, and his presence will be greatly missed. We appreciate your thoughts and prayers as we grieve this loss. Details for a memorial service will be shared soon. Thank you for your support." Of course, Sid Eudy, as I mentioned, had a incredibly extensive career in professional wrestling. He first kind of burst on to the pro wrestling scene in 1989. He did actually make his debut in 1987, and he had brief stints in World Class Championship Wrestling, but certainly probably the biggest sort of break of his career began in 1989 when he was in NWA World Championship Wrestling. He was part of the Skyscrapers tag team. He was managed by Teddy Long. He was eventually paired by Danny Spivey. He was actually originally slated to be a singles wrestler, but he, again, was placed into this tag team. The team was short-lived. Eudy was replaced actually by Mean Mark Callis, later became The Undertaker, after suffering a broken rib and a punctured lung during a match with the Steiner brothers at the November 1989 Clash of Champions 9. Now, following his recovery, Eudy was introduced on the May 11, 1990 edition of NWA Power Hour as the newest member of Ric Flair's Four Horsemen. He was billed by the ring announcers as being from wherever he damn well pleases. He was the muscle of the group, and he was initially brought in to kind of counteract the strength of RoboCop. Yes, RoboCop at Capital Combat, that infamous RoboCop appearance. His first televised match back was a 26-second loss to Lex Luger on the Clash of the Champions 11 Coastal Crush, in which the referee performed a fast 3 count. It had been rumoured that possibly that was because of backstage heat. That's what certainly Sid said at the time. Now, as one of the Horsemen, Eudy feuded with Paul Orndorff and the Junkyard Dog. He attacked NWA World Heavyweight Champion Sting following the Champions title match at Clash of the Champions 12, setting up his first feud as a singles wrestler. At Halloween Havoc, a fake Sting, Barry Windham, in collusion with Sid, lets him pin him after switching places with the real Sting in order for Sid to win the bout. However, they were thwarted when the real Sting came out and beat Sid to retain the title. Now, eventually, as I mentioned, this kind of soured. The Horsemen amicably split in 1991, during which he entered negotiations with the WWF. Despite a huge contract offer and promise of a world championship run, Eudy announced his intentions to leave WCW. Before departing, he had this short feud with El Gigante that ended with a loss at the Super Brawl 1 event. But then he moved over to the World Wrestling Federation, again, really jumping onto the main scene. That's when he really changed once again into a different character. He made his WWF debut in an untelevised segment attacking the Mountie in May of 1991. He defeated Ted DiBiase in his first WWE match at a non-televised event in Calgary. But on the June 8th episode of Primetime Wrestling, vignettes began airing promoting his WWF debut and introducing him as his new character, as mentioned, of Sid Justice. On the July 20 episode of Superstars, he debuted on WWF television and announced he was the special guest referee for the main event of that year's SummerSlam, where the Ultimate Warrior and WWF champion Hulk Hogan teamed up against the Triangle of Terror, that being Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel Mustafa, and General Adnan in a 3-on-2 handicap match. Later on that night, Sid saved Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth from an attack at the hands of Jake Roberts and The Undertaker at the newlywed couple's reception. And during this time, Sid defeated Kato in his first televised match. In a match with Roberts, Sid actually injured his biceps. He was forced to miss a Survivor Series pay-per-view, but he returned at the Royal Rumble, which had an added stipulation. Of course, the winner would win the vacant WWF Championship, which had been stripped from Hulk Hogan. Sid entered at number 29 and was among the final 4 wrestlers, along with Hogan, Randy Savage, and Ric Flair. It's one of the most famous Royal Rumbles of all time, before he eliminated both Savage and then Hogan, leaving himself and Flair in the ring. Now, Hogan was still at ringside after being eliminated. He grabbed Sid's arm and he tried to pull him over the top rope. It gave Flair the chance to grab Sid's leg and throw him out of the match and become the new WWF champion. Less than a week later, on the January 25th episode of Superstars, WWF President Jack Tunney had a press conference to announce who would face Flair for the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 8. Before Tunney even announced who the number one contender could be, Sid stood up as if Tunney had called his name, and yet to Sid's annoyance, Tunney chose Hogan. Of course, this then led into the whole confusion about WrestleMania 8. At one point, it looked like it was going to be Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, and possibly plans then changed because it was later announced that instead it would be Ric Flair versus Randy Savage for the WWF Championship, and Hulk Hogan would battle Sid, not facing off against Ric Flair. Now, Sid hired Harvey Whippleman as his manager. Sid also began a post-match gimmick where he would further injure his defeated opponent with one or more power bombs, his finishing move, and sometime after the defeated wrestler was placed on a stretcher, following this up by grabbing the stretcher and running it into a fixture, such as a ring post or a guardrail or something like that. Now, at WrestleMania 8, Sid lost his match, the main event, to Hulk Hogan by disqualification when Papa Shango interferes on Sid's behalf, allowing the two to double-team Hogan until the returning Ultimate Warrior stormed to the ring and saved Hogan. Nearing the end of the match, Sid actually kicked out of Hogan's trademark leg drop. Sid was disqualified when Whippleman quickly jumped into the ring to get involved. Now, it had been then reported at the time possibly Sid had failed a drug test prior to his WrestleMania match for Hulk Hogan. He was allowed to do the match, went on the European tour. Now, after the tour, he was told that he was going to serve his suspension, resulting in Eudy quitting instead and pursuing a career in softball. At the time of his departure, reportedly, he was set to embark on a feud with the Ultimate Warrior, with the story being that Sid was angry. The Warrior had stuck his nose in his business at WrestleMania 8. He did actually begin this feud with the Warrior in this European tour in 1992. They wrestled on 2 house shows, with Warrior winning twice by disqualification. But after wrestling Warrior in Boston, Massachusetts, in April, Eudy voluntarily quit the company due to disagreements with Warrior and WWF management, in particular about the outcome of his match with the Warrior, and then he left and went back to WCW. Under his Sid Vicious name, he returned to WCW in May of 1993 as a mystery competitor of Colonel Robert Parker against Van Hammer at Slamboree. Sid defeated Hammer in a stretcher match. That summer, he teamed with Big Van Vader and reignited his feud with Sting. At Full Brawl, Sting's team, that being Sting, Davey Boy Smith, Dustin Rhodes, and the Shockmaster, yes, remember him, defeated Sid's team, Sid, Vader, and Harlem Heat in a War Games match. At Halloween Havoc, Sid faced Sting in a rematch of the same pay-per-view 3 years previous, but was beaten by a roll-up. The following week on television, Sid turned on Robert Parker and became a babyface. This would be Sid's last appearance with WCW before being released from his contract due to the infamous incident involving Arn Anderson. It had been planned to have Sid challenge for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Vader at that year's Starrcade, but Sid was removed after his departure from this match. It led to Ric Flair being elevated to the challenger against Vader. Based on worldwide tapings that took place prior to his departure, Sid would have defeated Vader and became the new champion, but again, because of this incident, it didn't happen. Now, for a period of time there, from sort of 94 to 96, he was involved in the USWA, that's the United States Wrestling Association, but eventually he returned to WWF in 1995, and actually he returned to WWF as the new bodyguard of Shawn Michaels. Of course, this was the feud with Michaels and Diesel. Now, along with Jenny McCarthy, Sid accompanied Michaels to the ring for Michaels' WWF Championship match against then-champion and Michaels' former bodyguard Diesel at WrestleMania 11. Michaels had the match won after hitting his signature super kick, but Sid stood on the ring apron and distracted referee Earl Hebner, allowing Diesel in time to recover and pin Michaels after a jackknife powerbomb to win the match and retain his title. The next night on Raw, Michaels had expressed his dissatisfaction with Sid's interference and gave him the night off for his rematch against Diesel at the first ever In Your House pay-per-view. In response, Sid replied to Shawn, "You don't give me the night off," and attacked Michaels from behind before hitting him with a powerbomb 3 times, turning Michaels into a face. Diesel then came to Michaels' aid and clotheslined Sid over the top rope. Michaels claimed to have sustained a legitimate back injury as a result of the attack and was sidelined for 6 weeks, taking him out of the title match. Now, 2 weeks later, then this is when Sid transitioned into becoming a member of the $1 Million Corporation, involved with Ted DiBiase and Bam Bam Bigelow. He'd left the corporation, Bam Bam, so Sid had replaced him. Sid challenged Diesel to a match for the WWF Championship at In Your House. Diesel ended up winning the match via disqualification. Sid and Tatanka then continued to double team Diesel until Bam Bam Bigelow, the aforementioned Bigelow, came out to save him. And this led to Sid having various feuds in WWF during that year. Now, as I mentioned, during this period of time, Sid actually suffered a serious neck injury and he had to leave the WWE again. This was in sort of around, I think it was November of 1995. But he did return the following year on the July 8th episode of Raw, where he took up the gimmick of Sycho Sid. Maybe some people's favorite gimmick that he ever did. Now, under this version of the Sid gimmick, Eudy was a strident voiced and intense character prone to erratically unstable mannerisms, such as his random stares off into the distance, excessive eye blinking, laughter turned sudden seriousness, menacing fist bumps of fans during his entrances. They changed his entrance music as well, which was, again, really, really entertaining. And this led to him becoming the WWF champion. Of course, Survivor Series 1996, Sid had grabbed a camera from an operator, prepared to hit Michaels with it. Shawn Michaels' manager at the time, Jose Lothario, got on the ring apron and told Sid to put the camera down. He refused and hit Lothario in the chest with it instead. Although this was an act of a heel, the audience cheered wildly for him and booed Michaels. It was in Madison Square Garden, just they had done Sid's favor 4.5 years earlier against Hogan at the Royal Rumble. Sid dropped the camera, and as soon as he turned around, Michaels hit with sweet chin music. However, Michaels went outside of the ring to check on his manager instead of going for the pin. Sid hit Michaels in the back with a camera, then threw him back in the ring for hitting his powerbomb to win the WWF Championship. Now, he would hold it not for too long. Eventually, he dropped the title back to Michaels. During the match, Sid hit a choke slam at the Royal Rumble to Michaels and repeatedly powerbombed him on the outside of the ring. Later in the match, Jose Lothario got on the ring apron and Sid approached him. Before he could do anything to him, Michaels hit Sid in the back and in the face with the camera, knocking him out in the process. Michaels went for the pin, but Sid managed to kick out. Michaels then hit Sid with a sweet chin music to become the WWF champion for the second time. Now, this is where it gets quite crazy going into WrestleMania 13 in 97, of course, because he soon forfeited the title during unable to wrestle. A claim widely disputed. He lost his smile at the time. This then led to In Your House 13, the Final Four in Chattanooga, a four corners elimination match to determine the new champion after the title was vacant. It involved Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Vader. Hart won and was scheduled to face Sid the following night on the February 17 episode of Raw. During that match, Hart had Sid trapped in the sharpshooter submission when Stone Cold Steve Austin, who Hart was feuding with at the time, came outside of the ring and hit Hart with a steel chair, allowing Sid to hit the powerbomb on Hart and win the WWF Championship for a second time. This then led to a WrestleMania main event, his second WrestleMania main event. Of course, this is, again, a very illustrious career that Sycho Sid had. 2 WrestleMania main events, 2 WWF Championship runs as well. WrestleMania 13, he main evented against The Undertaker. He lost the title against The Undertaker when Hart interfered during the match, allowing the latter to hit a tombstone pile driver. The next night on Raw is War, Sid made one more appearance after Bret Hart attacked and injured Shawn Michaels in the ring after a face-to-face promo about Hart turning on the fans. Sid was promoted as wrestling Bret at the April In Your House and versus Mankind in May, but both ended up being cancelled due to Sid sustaining a neck injury. He returned on the June 2nd edition of Raw, losing a WWF Championship title rematch to The Undertaker. At King of the Ring on June 8th, Sid and the Legion of Doom faced the Hart Foundation in a 6-man tag team match, which the Hart Foundation won when Owen pinned Sid with a roll-up. On June 9, Sid defeated Owen on Raw before disappearing from television for over a month. His last match was a loss to Owen on a house show in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He returned on the July 14 episode of Raw, making a brief final appearance, and despite being promoted as wrestling Vader at SummerSlam, he was released by WWF once again to recover from a neck injury that would require surgery. Now, we didn't really see him again on WWF television for a very long time, but really in sort of the mainstream, you didn't really see him all that much. Now, he was on the independent circuit. I mean, he was largely inactive for nearly a year after leaving WWE because of this neck injury. He did wrestle on the indie scene in around sort of 98. It was reported that possibly Sid spent a period of time in early 99 touring Mexico. Whether or not, again, that's legitimate, we don't know. He did appear in ECW after some time on the Tennessee independent circuit. Sid actually debuted in Extreme Championship Wrestling in January of 1999. He had matches with the Dudley Boys, John Kroner, Skull Von Crush, and Just Incredible. He left ECW in May due to monetary problems plaguing the promotion, and that led to his return to WCW, his last sort of long run as a full-time full-time wrestler in his pro wrestling career. At the behest of his real-life friends, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, Sid returned to WCW at the Great American Bash in June of '99, joining Randy Savage's heel stable Team Madness. Upon his return, he took the nickname of the Millennium Man and faced the WCW World Champion Kevin Nash on the July 5th, 1999 episode of WCW Nitro. Sid was dubbed as having an undefeated and winning streak, much like Goldberg had previously, although the majority of his streak was due to Sid coming to the ring and powerbombing wrestlers already in a match or immediately following their match and thus defeating them. Now, in September of '99, Sid won his first and only WCW United States Heavyweight Championship at Full Brawl. He then began feuding with Goldberg, who challenged him for the United States title at Halloween Havoc. Early on in the night, however, their backstage fighting led to Sid requiring stitches, though he refused to be treated, which led to Sid bleeding openly the entire night. After brawling with Goldberg, a weary Sid lost the match due to excessive bleeding, awarding Goldberg the US Championship against his opponent's will. Sid then lost to Goldberg in an I Quit match at Mayhem, effectively ending their feud and Sid's streak. WCW later released a VHS home video highlighting Sid's return to WCW and called him Sid Vicious, Millennium Man. Of course, during this whole Goldberg situation, that's where you get the famous coming out with his car crushed and him screaming Goldberg at the top of the air. Now, after the Millennium Man gimmick ran dry, Sid became a face and started to contend for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. He was placed in a match at Sold Out in January to fill the suddenly vacant title after Bret Hart was forced to relinquish it due to concussion. Sid would lose the match to Chris Benoit, but the title was then vacated after Benoit left for the WWF the next day, obviously part of the Radical story. The on-screen explanation was that Sid's foot was under the rope during his submission loss. The next week, Sid was presented with a challenge by Nash, who had become the commissioner of WCW. If he could beat Ron and Don Harris in a match on Monday Nitro that night, he would face Nash for the championship later on. Sid managed to defeat the Harris brothers and eventually Nash himself to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. 2 nights later on Thunder, Nash stripped Sid of the championship due to him not beating the legal Harris brother in the match on Nitro. A rematch between Sid and Nash was set up, but Sid again defeated Nash on Nitro to win the title for a second time. He later successfully defended the title at Super Bowl in 2000 in a 3-way match against Scott Hall and Jeff Jarrett. Uncensored, Sid defended his title against Jeff Jarrett in thanks to help from returning Hulk Hogan, which set up a match for the following night's Nitro, pitting Sid and Hogan against Jarrett and Scott Steiner. During the course of the match, Sid turned heel and attacked Hogan due to his being incensed that the fans were chanting Hogan's name. He chokeslammed Hogan and forced the referee to count Hogan being pinned, although the official result was a no contest. This apparently may have been to set up a match at the upcoming Spring Stampede pay-per-view in April. However, shortly after this, WCW began its New Blood angle, and Sid, along with the other WCW champions at the time, were all stripped of the championships. He did not play a large role in the angle that followed and was kept off television for several months. Now, this is when we get into his injury, probably one of the most grotesque injuries in professional wrestling histories, and his first retirement. Now, Sid returned later in the year as a challenger for Scott Steiner's WCW World Heavyweight Championship. Sid failed to beat Steiner in their title match at Starrcade. On January 14, 2001, at the Sin pay-per-view in Indianapolis, Sid faced Steiner, Jeff Jarrett, and Road Warrior Animal in a 4 corners match for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. But it's not really remembered that because, of course, during the match, he suffered a near career-ending injury. WCW executive John Laurinaitis allegedly felt that Eudy needed to broaden his arsenal of wrestling moves and suggested that he try an aerial maneuver. Now, despite his, quote, unwillingness, Sid felt it unnecessary for a wrestler of his size and type to do high spots and didn't feel comfortable doing them. During the match, Eudy suffered a leg fracture following his leap from the second turnbuckle in an attempt to do a big boot on Steiner. This had him awkwardly landing with all of his weight on one foot while kicking with the other, severely fracturing his leg on which he landed. Eudy broke his left leg in half, snapping both the tibia and fibula. Again, it's one of the most grotesque injuries, with at least one of the bones breaking through the skin and rotating his foot without his input at 90 degrees anti-clockwise. The fracture was too graphic for many television stations to re-air, although it was shown on the following Nitro. The injury put Sid out of action indefinitely, and he pondered retiring from wrestling for good, saying, quote, I had about a year left on my contract, and I was thinking back then, prior to hurting my leg, about what I was going to do as far as wrapping up my career. The only thing I really wanted to do was ideally go out in a big pay-per-view like WrestleMania or something like that, main event, leave like that, and not come back again. It would really be the retirement match. Now, a 17-inch rod was placed in his leg during a 2-hour surgery. For a while, Eudy used a cane to walk. Sid later sued WCW, claiming he was made to jump off the second rope against his objections. The injury forced a plot change in the Super Bowl Revenge event. The main event was supposed to be Kevin Nash, Diamond Dallas Page, and Sid against Scott Steiner, Jeff Jarrett, and Road Warrior Animal, but was rewritten as Nash versus Scott Steiner. Now, of course, during that time, WCW was bought by WWF in March 2001, and largely he made some appearances at the World Wrestling All-Stars situation during its 2002 Australia tour. It was also announced that he would not be featured on that show due to a broken arm. He also filed this lawsuit against Universal Wrestling Corporation, the Turner Holding Company, for what remained of WCW's unpurchased assets, seeking redress for the injury he sustained. The judge ultimately ruled in the favor of the UWC. Now, after almost 3.5 years of rehabilitation and preparation, Eudy did actually return to active wrestling in June of 2004 on the Canadian independent circuit. He then largely did sort of indies for the remainder of his career in the likes of Memphis or in Tennessee, of course, largely where he's from. But he did eventually make a return to WWE television on the June 25th, 2012 episode of Raw. Sycho Sid made his return to WWE in a match against Heath Slater, where he defeated Slater as part of the ongoing celebration leading up to WWE's 1000th episode of Raw. It was his first appearance on Raw since the July 14, 1997 episode, and his first match on the show since June 9, 1997. Sid would reappear on the actual 1000th episode on July 23rd, where he and other WWE legends helped lead to take down Slater. On August 5th, 2017, Sid wrestled his last match of his career, defeating Paul Rosenberg in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, for Great North Wrestling. Of course, again, very sad news about his passing. We'll be posting a tribute most likely tomorrow. Sycho Sid, Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, Sid Eudy, rest in peace.